Good morning, Alejandro. Thanks for coming today to Elcano Institute to address on the topic of the U.S. approach to violent extremism. Could you please explain what is that approach?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you very much for welcoming me here. It's a pleasure and an honor. U.S. approach is one that's been evolving and shifting. After 9/11, there was a very concerted effort to try and empower our law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And so for many years, until about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, the focus was mainly on surveillance and arrests. And so you had changes to law, policy, and infrastructure that were meant to basically bolster the ability of our law enforcement and intelligence agencies to prevent the next attack. However, what our policymakers, community members, lawmakers, and other people have increasingly found is that there are limitations to that approach. Law enforcement and intelligence agencies, they cannot go it alone, and they cannot arrest their way out of the problem. And so essentially what you had starting in 2010 was a shift in strategy. One that was focused only on arrests to now addressing the underlying symptoms and problems, not just the violent manifestation of violent extremism. And as a result of all of that then, this new strategy, countering violent extremism, is incorporating and involving a much greater diversity of actors around the country. Not just governmental, but non-governmental, private businesses. You have educators, mental health professionals, social service workers, in some cases even religious workers. And the idea is to have a whole of community approach, not just a whole of government approach to this kind of an issue. And that countering violent extremism, at least how it's being discussed, is that it is meant to be driven from the bottom up rather than imposed from the top down. It's still an evolving, fluid situation, so it's very difficult to make any certain judgments right now. There are some very obvious challenges to countering violent extremism, a lot of misperception and mistrust, particularly by community partners such as American Muslims who either don't understand what CVE is, or in other cases they have questions about what CVE is going to entail, such as are community members being asked to spy upon their own community members, or is this more about developing healthy communities? So the very framing of the issue itself, even though the substance is the same, but the framing of the issue is very important. And so these programs and these practices are very new. They have only been a couple of years old. They are still continuing to evolve. You have things coming from the government, you have things coming from civil society. How effective they're going to be, that is yet to be determined. We as researchers right now are not only trying to come up with and understand what are the effective approaches through evaluations, but we're also trying to gather more and more data in understanding what drives people into these kind of violent movements and what also pushes them away successfully. The situation is one in which the numbers are small and we need to keep the threat in proportion. That said though, these are very deadly actors. There have been a spike in arrests compared to previous years, 4 or 5-fold difference in some cases, depending on whose numbers you use. And so as a result of this increased number of arrests, this is garnering a lot of attention, not just from law enforcement lawmakers, but even from other community members and from the larger American public. I don't want to say that this is a pessimistic situation. It's not, because there are a lot of promising approaches that are taking place. What I think needs to be understood simply is that the situation is an evolving one. There is an increasing awareness and interest in understanding these kinds of things. And one of the most important things as well is that people are also actively talking about the necessity of working with Muslim communities as partners, not just as suspects in this fight against violent extremism.
Yeah. And are confident the law enforcement with the Muslim community? They work close?
That depends on which law enforcement agency we're talking about in which part of the country. Some law enforcement agencies have very good working relationships, others don't. It just really depends on the context.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.